Hello, everyone, and welcome to Saturday. A few months ago, Apple finally, after all these years, allowed emulators onto the App Store, which I know is not a big deal for anyone that either jailbroke iPhones or used Android for ever. But for iOS users, it was a big deal, and I used that as an opportunity to start replaying some games that I haven't played in a while or playing new games. In May, I played Mother 3 again for the first time in a long time. In June, I played through Golden Sun. And then in July, I started the sequel to Golden Sun, The Lost Age. It's taken a little time, 2 months, but tonight I beat Golden Sun, The Lost Age. And I wanted a chance to talk a little bit about that because obviously it took longer, right? It took a month to play through Golden Sun, just a little bit in my spare time, but it's taken over 2 months to play Lost Age. Although admittedly, we've also had like a bunch of company and stuff too. Like Paul was here, but even in August, there was a bunch of guests and stuff like that. So I finally got through it. I wanted to talk about it and my experiences with it and how I feel about the set, Golden Sun and The Lost Age. Because for those that are not aware, Golden Sun and The Lost Age were developed as one game. It was developed as like a big, long game. The scope of Golden Sun and Lost Age together is massive. It is a massive undertaking. And, pretty quickly they realized that, this is actually two games. And I already did a vlog talking about Golden Sun, so I'm not going to dive into that too much. But I am going to talk a bit about how Golden Sun connects to Lost Age. I'm going to do all of this as spoiler-free as I can, by the way. So if you've never played the Golden Sun games, this will give you a good rundown. The first thing I'm going to say is if you haven't played the games at all and you're interested in playing the games, I encourage you to play the games. You have to start with Golden Sun. You should start with Golden Sun. And my advice is if you play through Golden Sun and that was enough, then just stop. It's a rather complete thought. There is clearly more. Like when you get to the end, you'll be like, there's clearly more to this, but you could stop there. And I think that you would be pretty satisfied. If you choose to continue, you will be moving into the Lost Stage. And Golden Sun does this very, very cool thing where you play through the entirety of Golden Sun, 20-something hour game, and then at the end it gives you this code, or you can use a link cable, to connect to a copy of The Lost Age and import all of your stuff. Your character's levels, their abilities, their equipment, like all this stuff. Very, very cool thing. And you have to remember that at the time that this was happening, this was like the early 2000s. Very neat. One of the words I'm going to continue to use to describe Golden Sun and especially Lost Age in this video is ambitious. It is remarkably ambitious. And while Golden Sun itself wasn't, like from a story perspective, wasn't like anything super radical or fancy. It was a pretty standard JRPG fare. It was still well done. And it was very, very beautiful for, a Game Boy Advance game, especially of that era. And you could use the abilities outside of, combat. Some cool ideas. And the fact that it connected to the Lost Age is really, really neat. I played Golden Sun when it came out, but I never played the Lost Age. This was my first time playing through the Lost Age. And the first few hours of the Lost Age are really cool. In Golden Sun, you're playing as a party of 4. And in that game, there's like another party that is essentially like the villains to some extent, kind of working against you. In the Lost Age, you play as those people. Later in the game, the initial party from the first game meets up, so then you have a party of 8. That's very neat. But you're kind of like flipping sides in a way, and you're playing. You're not replaying the events from Golden Sun. You're like, continuing the story, but from the other perspective. When the game starts, like the scope of the game feels very big. Because the whole point of the Golden Sun games together is that you're working towards lighting these 4 lighthouses, or depending on which game you're playing, not lighting the lighthouses. There's a lot of back and forth on like what the teams are trying to do because the parties are against each other. But there's these 4 lighthouses, and in Golden Sun you get through 2 of them. So by the time you get to the end, you're like, there is clearly more. And again, you can stop playing there. But then Lost Age is where you kind of finish the story. And if you want to have the entire story, you do have to play through the Lost Age. The problem is Lost Age starts out pretty good. Like it's not too difficult to understand things. Like it feels very similar to Golden Sun. I didn't use a guide for Golden Sun. I used like a little bullet point guide to help me ensure I wasn't missing anything too drastic, because you have to find certain things in Golden Sun 1 before you get to Golden Sun 2, because there's content you'll miss out on if you don't have the content from Golden Sun 1, which is kind of wild. But again, ambitious. So in the Lost Age, the first few hours, I was like, all right, this feels pretty much like Golden Sun. And then the game kind of opens up a little bit, and you realize how big Lost Age is. You're like, oh, this isn't like Golden Sun. Golden Sun's like, okay, we're gonna go here. Okay. Lost Age, the map kind of opens up, and you're like, whoa, this is large. And more importantly, it becomes a little obtuse. Like, I could get through Golden Sun without having to have a guide. I would miss a few things, but I didn't have to have a guide. In the Lost Age, you have to? I don't know how, legitimately, I do not know how anyone could get through the Lost Age and actually find all of the stuff that they're trying to find without using a walkthrough. It seems impossible. And very early on into the Lost Age, it occurred to me, I was like, where am I supposed to go? Where am I? I don't, it's only a few hours into the game, and I'm like, I don't understand where it wants me to go. So I had to start using a walkthrough. And as I continued on to the game, I kept using the walkthrough because it was not always very clear. And the game is so huge, and it's very old school in its thoughts. And I know that will appeal to some people, but I think in modern gaming era, it's not going to appeal to a lot of people. You basically have to play it with a walkthrough, because it's one of those games where it's basically wander forever. Wander until you just stumble across the thing that you're supposed to do, because the amount of dialogue that it gives you to direct you to things is almost non-existent. In some cases, it is non-existent. It's just you'll get there. It reminded me a little bit of, I played through Dragon Quest 1 and 2 a few years back when I was traveling. And when I was doing it while I was traveling, I didn't have any access to the internet because I was on a plane. And there were parts of the game where I was like, what the heck am I supposed to? I was just wandering around trying to figure out what to do. And that's what Lost Age feels like, except in some ways worse, because it's much, much bigger than, Dragon Quest 1 and 2. So if you play through Lost Age, you kind of have to accept that. You have to accept all right, I'm going to probably have to use a walkthrough, or you're the type of gamer that's I just really want to, I'm okay with spending lots of time searching around and trying to figure stuff out, and hope you figure out what the next objective is. The combat stuff was fun. It felt very similar to the first game. There is a lot of forgeable material in the game. So at some point in the game, you find a blacksmith, and there's all these different forgeable materials that you can take to the blacksmith, and then it's kind of a dice roll of what specific item in that set that he will make. And that's a very cool thing. I thought that was a lot of fun. The weird thing about that is that it felt sometimes like the placement of the materials were a little bit of an afterthought, because there's parts of the game where you start getting these materials, but you already have equipment that outclasses anything that would be made from those materials. So you get these materials and you're like, oh, cool, this. And then you go to the blacksmith and he's like, I made you this helm. And you're like, this helm sucks. Why did I only just now discover this forgeable material? This should have been earlier in the game. And that sort of thing happens a lot. There's a lot of times where the equipment feels misplaced in some way. The puzzles from Golden Sun 1 are back. The puzzles are an element of the Golden Sun series I really liked, because you are using your spells that you can use in battle and stuff, but you're using them in the overworld to solve puzzles. The problem is, and Golden Sun 1 had this issue too, the problem is about half the time, it's not a puzzle. There's a difference between a puzzle and busy work for the player. If you walk into a room and you immediately know what you're supposed to do, and it's like, the game just wants me to push this pillar 25 spaces, that's not a puzzle. That's just asking the player to do busy work. There are some legitimately good puzzles in the game. Like, there were some stumpers where I'm like walking around and I'm like, oh my God, like, okay, I have to even figure out what spell to even use to get this puzzle started. And then once I get it started, like, it's an order of operations thing where you're trying to figure out how to do it. And like, that was fantastic. But for every one of those puzzles in the game, there are 2 puzzles that you walk in and you're like, okay, so I have to do this, and this is going to take me 3 minutes. And like, that doesn't feel exciting. Like, you don't feel smart for doing that. You sigh because you're like, okay, Golden Sun's asking me to do this thing again. And that part's not very fun. The other thing that was a little weird was the story, because in Golden Sun, at least it feels like there's a driving force of like, okay, we have to do this, and we're trying to ultimately get towards this goal. Lost Stage's story meanders a lot, and it's not always clear that there is a driving force to push the characters to the next location. And sometimes it feels like they don't even really care about that. It's a long game. If you play them together, it's like a 50 or 60 hour game, but Lost Stage is the longer one. And, occasionally there were story beats that was like, all right, our characters are motivated to go do this. But a lot of the times that motivation was just absent, which really, when you pair that with the fact that you kind of have to just wander around to figure out what to do next, you kind of stop caring about the plot. And that part was bad. Like, I knew I was going to push through on this game to the end, but like, having issues with the story kind of meandering and not having a lot of motivation for the characters, with the fact that it's hard to figure out what to do if you're not following a walkthrough, that made it difficult. To me, Lost Stage it was not as good as Golden Sun 1, but it was clearly so much more ambitious that I still ended up liking it a lot. And I think that's the weird part for me, is that I look at all these pieces and I'm like, there's a lot of things that Golden Sun Lost Stage is not getting quite right. But I have to give it credit because it is so ambitious for what it is. It is a Game Boy Advance game that you are bringing in your progress from the previous game. It has a gigantic world where you go and explore all of these different towns. And yeah, sometimes it's a little hard to figure out what to do, but like, it's there. There are 72 of the Jinn creatures, the genies, across the 2 games. And like, those are the fact that there's that many in there and figuring out how to get them is sometimes difficult, but like, it is extremely ambitious. And I think there's a part of me that loves video games so much that getting a chance to experience that was kind of humbling, because you're realizing that they're doing all of this and it's just so much to cram into 2 Game Boy Advance carts. So that's my takeaway. That is my takeaway. It's a long experience. I highly recommend Golden Sun 1. And if you're feeling it, then move into Lost Stage. But just be aware that you're almost certainly going to need a walkthrough. It's not going to be super apparent. And, it's long. And at times I think that Lost Stage definitely, drags on a little bit. There are some dungeons in that game that, first off, there's a ton of dungeons. But there's some dungeons in that game that are like, 2 to 3 hours long. So you're really going to be wandering around there. But did I enjoy myself? Yes. But I have to clarify that I enjoyed myself more as a, video game history lesson, a video game appreciation, than as a game itself. And that's my take on the Lost Stage. A very ambitious project from Camelot. And, I would love to see them do something with the Golden Sun IP again, because it's been some years and game design has changed, and I think that formula could work with just refining it just a little bit. But bravo to that entire team for tackling something like this. It would have been so easy for them to just change the scale and to make one Golden Sun game and be like, okay, we just need to, cut this, and push this together. That's not what they did. They didn't cut the stuff. They're just like, okay, we can do this. This is just 2 games now. And like, it's very, very cool. And if you love video games and you love like JRPGs, I think it would be worthwhile to check out. Okay, that's it. I did it. It feels good to have finished that because I dedicated, over 3 months of this year to playing the 2 Golden Sun games. And there is a third Golden Sun game for DS, but I don't know that I'm going to play that. I might at some point, but that's not really on my radar. I have been playing games on the phone because it's very convenient, but I'm not using a controller, so I have to play basically turn-based games. And the game that I'm working through now, that I've started since just a few days ago, was Advance Wars. Because Paul was playing Advance Wars on the Switch, and I'm kind of interested in playing it on the Switch, but my phone is more convenient. So I'm replaying Advance Wars 1, and I'm having a lot of fun. So maybe at some point I'll talk about that too. All right. Thanks for watching. Talk about your experiences and your feelings with Golden Sun, especially Lost Stage if you've played it. And let's meet back tomorrow, shall we?